College football nerds here talking Tennessee and Ohio State round one of the playoffs. Want to let y'all know, if you don't know already, we like to get nerdy with y'all. We got a model that's done very well this year, and I know that Ohio State fans like to say, because we see a lot of Ohio State fans, Josh, they're like, if our model ever misses, they let us know about it. But the funny thing is, if our model never missed, they'd never know about our model. All the best models in the world you've never heard of because somebody's rich on a beach somewhere. I got Josh with me. We're going to get nerdy with y'all, and we've got some interesting stuff about this game to talk about, including that model and some of the matchups. This game is really hard to judge. Ohio State was one of the few teams in the Big Ten who played a bunch of other good Big Ten teams. Everybody else was kind of isolated, and the Big Ten in general was pretty isolated this year. But we've got Tennessee, who, everybody wants to say they played a weak schedule, but I mean, they played Alabama and Georgia, which to me is pretty good. And I think we've got enough data to know that these are really good teams with really good defenses. But beyond that, the matchups are a little fuzzy to me. So, Josh, why don't you get into this and really just kind of give us a primer on what we might see with both of these defenses?
Yeah, so just give you a primer on like the main part of both teams. You wonder, Daniel, why I rant for as long as I do, and we wonder why more people don't like and subscribe, which you should if you haven't. It's because you ask me open-ended questions, and I'm a nerd, so when you ask a nerd an open-ended question, he talks for another 40 minutes. Defensively, I think these are two phenomenal defenses. We've talked all year that we've had a question if either one of these is the best defense in the country. We think Ohio State is probably the best defense in the country. But we've said, Daniel, several times, Tennessee might be the next best. And, I mean, Ohio State doesn't take a lot of explanation. You can call it collegefootballnerds.com, look at our stats page. And we do not only absolute stats, but we have something called expected performance, which is just, how you did versus your competition versus how everybody else did. So were you 30% better than average? Were you 30% worse than average? Points per game, they're not only first in the country at 10.9 points per game allowed. We don't include FCS for what it's worth. They're first in our expected performance or relative performance at negative 59%, meaning they allow about 60% less points to a given team than everyone else does. When you go across the board in their individual defensive statistics, they're 23 to 39% better than average. That's first in total yards per game, second in passing yards per game. We have them fifth in the passing yards per attempt, second in rushing yard per carry defense. I think, though, Daniel, the thing that people are probably going to underestimate is how high Tennessee actually is. They're sixth in points per game allowed, and they are sitting there really between like 15 to 30%. They're sixth in passing yard per attempt allowed. They're seventh in rushing yard per carry. And I went through and looked at it. This will be the best pass defense, according to our metrics, that Ohio State has faced. This will be roughly the third best run defense, which is saying something at seventh. The only two they played that were better were Michigan and Indiana. Ohio State did not run for 4 yards per carry in either game. They didn't run it great. They ran for over 100 yards versus Indiana, but on a fair amount of carries, right under 4 yards per carry. It was just okay. Mainly kind of, a couple burst carries helped that. Michigan, obviously, they couldn't really do anything. And Daniel, would you agree with me on this? I mean, everybody knows how good Ohio State is. I don't think they realize how good Tennessee is. And I would go so far to say Tennessee defensively, on paper, is a slightly better version of Michigan, which should be a somewhat concerning issue for an Ohio State team that is still grappling with, a left tackle injury situation and an unsettled offensive line that has seemed vulnerable offensively versus better defensive units this year.
We're talking about conference championship games. We're talking about playoff games. We're talking about the fact that this is the first year ever that teams are going to be hosting these games at home, probably higher ticket allotments. We've got a partner, a sponsor on this one that's going to help you find those tickets. It's SeatGeek. Josh, why don't you let us know what SeatGeek's got going on?
If you want to go out there and find a way to go watch the first year ever with home game, playoff games, go to South Bend, go to Happy Valley. SeatGeek is the #1 rated app on the internet for finding tickets. 28 million downloads, 70,000 events, anything from sports to music. If you go to the app, you can see everything they've got to offer. You can look at all the different events in your area. And if you think college football playoff, I mean, right here, anything you want to go to. They've got all the different events, all the different venues. SeatGeek, go look for the green dot. They rate the seats best to worst, 1 through 10. Green means good, red means bad. It's a great app and a great way to go see ball games.
By the way, you can use that app, you can use that website and preview what the seats would look like if you were sitting in them, which is a good way to help you decide which ones to purchase. And we came through for you guys. Use our code NERDS for $20 off tickets at SeatGeek. That's $20 off your first purchase with promo code NERDS. Make sure you click the link in the description and download that app. I think that everybody imagines Tennessee, if they're not familiar, Tennessee and Texas being high-flying offenses that have won that way, but it's been the opposite. They're winning because they're giving up, 10 points a game, and it's actually the opposite. Both offenses have struggled at points this year, but their defenses have been elite.
Yeah, and we say that. I think a lot of obviously some of the fans listening that are more astute or more in tune to the game or realize it, but I do think the reputation for Sarkisian and Heupel is fast-paced offense, explosive offense, and they have had to somewhat revert how they play. Tennessee plays at a slower tempo than I think people would expect. And, in terms of, how they've won games, that's kind of been the nature of it. But to your point, offensively, Tennessee's 48th in passing offense in our system. They're 29th in terms of absolute passing yardage. But that has come against really bad defenses. When you adjust for defensive quality, they're only 4% better than average, 48th in our metrics. But they are one of the best run teams in the country. They're 26th in rushing offense. In terms of yards per game rushing, I'll look this up, but I know most of the year they've led. They do lead 232 yards per game in the SEC, 5.1 yards per carry. They're the only SEC team that runs for over 5 yards a carry. And that has been their bread and butter. They're a run team. They kind of shorten games. They play great defense. Again, everything Michigan does, but better. And I will say, Daniel, you agree with me this. They're slightly better defense. I think they're a much better offense, all that said, than Michigan. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think Michigan's offense is terrible, so yes.
And, ultimately the point with Tennessee in a lot of these games has come down to quarterback play. Now, I'm going to look you in the eye, Tennessee fans, because there are a lot of you that checked out and called me an idiot. I got called every name under the sun at the beginning of the year, Daniel. We give honest opinions. And look, we would have a lot more fans and a lot more subscribers if we just told you what you wanted to hear every week. But I give you my honest opinion. Sometimes I am wrong. Sometimes I am an idiot. I was not an idiot, and I was not wrong with my concerns all offseason into the year about Nico Iamaleava. I finally screw that up again in another Iamaleava. I'm really congested. I'm doing the best I can, guys. When you look at his passing stats, he was phenomenal through week 4, and I kept saying there are things he does well and there are things he does not do well. He does not do well off platform. He does not like throwing on the run. He's very good at driving the ball. He's a super tall dude with a rocket arm. So he's great on those RPO concepts when they're open, especially in the seams. He can throw those seams 40 yards downfield, which I think could be a problem that Ohio State's going to should adjust for in terms of how they use their safeties, or you're going to get really exposed on the back end. But if you can move him off his spot, I think the thing with him is he's so tall. He's kind of the same problem that Desmond Ridder has. We talked about that with the Cincinnati game last year with Alabama when he went in the draft. He can't reset his feet very cleanly. So if he can step and throw on rhythm, he is clearly a 5-star quarterback, and that's why he was a 5-star. But this is why sometimes 5-star plus guys don't end up panning out completely as well as you'd hope. When he gets moved off his spot, he does not reset his feet quickly or well, and so his accuracy drops considerably, or a lot of times he can't actually get the ball out. And if you watch him on the run, there are open windows, and he will not throw the ball, I think, because he can't, unless he has his foot set with the right angle with his back foot back that he can actually drive it. Because if he's off, off angle, if he's got the wrong, his lead foot is forward on the run, which you do as you run because your feet go in front of each other, you'll notice a lot of times he has to hold the ball until he gets his feet reset. It's just kind of a weird thing. He's a little bit awkward, and I think that didn't show up in recruiting or even high school tape because they don't really evaluate your ability to throw off angle and off target. And so, Tennessee fans, give me a little bit of credit in the comments. Come on. I wasn't wrong. He got exposed a little bit as having some flaws. He was not the world's best quarterback. Again, I said at the time, he's only a true sophomore. He's going to get better, but I was seeing some things on tape to say, yeah, there are things he's going to have to learn and improve on to be the guy that everybody wants him to be. But that said, if you had to take Nico or you had to take Warren in Michigan, which one are you taking? You're taking Nico.
Yeah.
And so I do think Ohio State is in a dangerous situation. I will say I think Tennessee in this whole playoff, in many ways, is kind of the dark horse team in terms of the team that nobody's talking about that is really capable. They are capable offensively with one of the best run attacks, maybe the best run game in the playoff. They have probably one of the top 3 defenses for sure in the playoff, maybe the best defense. We'll see. The only question mark I have is their passing game. And so, Daniel, I'll turn it back to you with this. What do you think about Ohio State's passing game versus Pierce and this Tennessee defense? Are we going to see the same passing attack and offense that stalled a little bit late in the year with the Michigan game or, the Nebraska game? Or do you think this offense is going to be more capable due to the type of explosive athletes you have? I mean, how do you think that's going to turn out?
I think that the first half, both these teams are going to be in their script pretty hard. I think you're going to see an elevated level of offense in the first half potentially that slows down throughout the course of the game as these defenses take over. But I do think that both teams – look, Ohio State throws the ball better, I think, in their sort of rhythm passing, sort of short to intermediate throws. Tennessee, almost all of their success passing the ball and almost all of what contributes to Nico's yards per attempt average is hitting big shots. It's really different how they run their offensive schemes and how they have success. If Ohio State can prevent Tennessee from hitting any deep balls in this game or any like RPO slants that go for 70 yards, the game's over. If they can prevent those, even though I think Dylan Sampson is a phenomenal running back, and for Ohio State fans who haven't heard of Dylan Sampson, he has almost as many rushing yards combined alone as Judkins and Henderson have combined. He has 10 100-yard games this year. He has 22 touchdowns. He's a phenomenal running back. But, Josh, we just got finished talking about Penn State and SMU and talking about how Penn State ran for 8.7 per and had almost 300 yards rushing against Oregon. Josh, maybe you know this. Maybe you don't. It's an interesting fact. Who's the lead rusher for Penn State against Ohio State this year? Guess.
Was it Drew Aller?
It was Tyler Warren.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that seemed like the obvious answer because I'm pretty sure Tyler Warren leads them in punting somehow at this point.
I mean, not Singleton, not Katron Allen, not Drew Aller, who is pretty mobile. It was Tyler Warren. It was a tight end who's the number one running. Outside of him, you had Aller at 3.1, Allen at 2.3, Singleton at 2.5. They could not run against Ohio State. And this is a good running team. For all of Penn State's faults offensively, they can run the ball. And so I do wonder if we get into a situation where neither team can run, I'm going to favor Ohio State because I do think that they're a little more consistent in their passing game. And I think, their back seven is pretty good at preventing a ton of deep balls. But, Josh, I want you to explore this scenario. And I know you hate hypotheticals. This is why I'm like, this whole video is just me giving you stuff you hate. If we forget the Michigan game for Ohio State and we forget the Arkansas game for Tennessee, does that change how you feel about these two teams, both in this matchup and maybe nationally?
It's an interesting question. I think if you forget those two games, Daniel, I mean, I don't know that there's much doubt that these two teams would be probably considered easily two of the 5 best teams in the country in terms of quality, right? And this is a point we make a lot, and we just made it in the last, we started by recording the SMU Penn State video, that when you talk about resumes and rankings, and we usually do a top 12 through the season, you have to take those losses into account. And, we do ours based on how, if you traded schedules, how do you think you would do? But when I do that, I always assume if you lost to a bad team that you would lose to that team every time. I kind of assume that the past results are for sure. For rankings purposes. For power ratings purposes, you can't do that. You know, when you have games that are sort of aberrations, sometimes they are aberrations. And, you know, inconsistency doesn't mean bad. It means inconsistent. We have a consistency score in our model, Daniel, which I sort of baked in there as a check to say, how consistent is our model score prediction for a given team with the past actual game results for that team? And I don't know if there's one lower, but in this arbitrary metric I created just as a check, Ohio State is negative 61, which is just horrendous. And what that means is our model says, you know, when I go back and remodel the games Ohio State already played, I don't ever get the same score of what Ohio State actually did in that game. Good or bad. It's not saying you're a bad team. And what that really represents is the fact that Ohio State's performance has been highly inconsistent. They have not, say play up or down to competition, just good and off weeks. I mean, they have not been the same team on a regular basis. And so if you view it that way, and again, Tennessee's consistency score, by the way, is 80. So pretty good. Then I think it really starts to draw in a contrast the fact that, you know, when you take out the Michigan performance, if you just look at the best games Ohio State played, they have been the best team in the country. But if you look at the whole schedule, it's much more of a mixed bag. Now, I'm already on record in the Penn State video. I've made all them mad. Please go in the comments and defend me. I think Penn State absolutely jobbed Ohio State. But getting the conference championship game with a loss to Ohio State purely because of schedule. I don't care what you have to say. What, Penn State didn't play Michigan, but they also didn't play teams that were as hard as Ohio State. If they had played Oregon in the regular season, I have to assume they would have lost, and Ohio State would be in the conference championship game, right? So it is purely a function of schedule that Penn State was in that game. And because of that, Ohio State gets what I think is one of the most dangerous games in this bracket. Ohio State should be playing SMU, and I think due to matchups, Ohio State, I would favor them heavily in that game because SMU's problem is pass defense. And they're a pass-first offense that I think would have real issues with Ohio State's pass rush and general disruption in the front seven. Instead, they get Tennessee. And, you know, Daniel, I don't know if you want me to get in the model because I just monologued, but I think there's a real difference between the average performance between these two teams and the real one. So since you gave me carte blanche, and, you know, I have to use the lawyer word occasionally, let's talk about the model. So our model has this 27-10 Ohio State over Tennessee. Much larger than the Vegas spread. The reason for that being, again, our model creates scoring profiles based on teams and what they need to succeed. And a lot of this is based on some theories I have, pulling back the curtain a little bit, in terms of, you know, stall points, runaway points, points at which the offense starts to break down in certain areas, identifying where an offense needs to be successful in order to operate and score points, and identifying at what point the offense starts to have runaway success. I love Pate. He calls this, I think I called it a stall point, and he took it and ran with it as freeze point. I don't own the concept, not blaming him, but I'm going to take full credit for the one that came up with that years ago. Tennessee has a real stall point problem, and you can look at that. The Arkansas loss, they score 14 points. Next week versus Florida, 23. Next week versus Alabama, 24. They have a lot of games where they do not score very much. And now they are playing the best defense in college football. It is perfectly sensible from our model's perspective for this to be a game where Tennessee cannot score as much as they did against Arkansas, where they scored 14. So it has them predicted to be the lowest score of the season against the best defense of the season. That's a sane thing to do. The problem I have with that, Daniel, is that Tennessee has not been consistent. I mean, Georgia, they scored 17 points. But again, Alabama 24 is not bad. Florida 23 points, not bad. They've had games where they score 30 plus. It also assumes that there's no turnovers involved to a certain extent. It does actually factor that in. It's too unpredictable. But I think the 27 number for Ohio State is maybe a bit generous because they scored 20 points versus Penn State, 10 points versus Michigan. I think that is the consistency score issue with Ohio State. It is reasonable to think that Tennessee will have a very hard time scoring in this game. The question is whether or not Ohio State themselves can actually score. I think that's the issue at a good clip, like you're talking about. And so 5.2 yards per play, 7.4 yards per attempt, 3.3 yards per carry is pretty miserable for Ohio State. That is just borderline functional. I don't think you score 27 usually there. It's more in the low 20s. But Tennessee at 4.2 yards per play, under 6 yards per attempt, 3.1 yards per carry, that is truly miserable. That is an offense that is not working. So our model really thinks this is a low-scoring game. And I will say, Daniel, I think a lot of the way I want to personally view this is a game where you have to be careful of looking the average predicted score versus the variable results. This is a game I think Ohio State could run away with. If Tennessee gets shut down, they turn the ball over, which they have done a couple times. But Tennessee is a big shot, big play, RPO-based offense. They have a really good ability to generate negative plays and turnovers. That is an underrated back seven. I still don't understand how they're as good as they are, but they are. They have a first-round draft pick pass rusher in Pierce that's as good or better than anyone Ohio State's played. And they are going to be able to make disruptive plays. So, Daniel, my personal take on this is a game that is going to be a low-scoring game. And I think there is a good probability that Tennessee does not hit those plays because they have not done so with any consistency. And they do score something like 10 to 14 points. And Ohio State wins scoring 20 to 10, scores 3 points late. That's a version of this game. I think there's also a possibility that Tennessee does hit a couple of those plays. Maybe in their script, maybe late in the game, maybe Ohio State. We've been critical for years that they're a little too dependent on one single high safety. That can get you burned when you play better passing offenses, which we've seen a lot in postseason play. Tennessee's going to have guys behind the defense. Nico has not hit those guys consistently this year. If he does, it takes 2 plays to go 10 points to 24, and maybe they win this game. And so I think a lot of this, to me, really, Daniel, hinges on the volatility of Tennessee offensively, despite the fact that our model actually thinks Ohio State is the inconsistent one.
So one of the things we talked about before we started rolling on this was I mentioned that, there's a late touchdown with the Vanderbilt game that didn't count. It was like garbage time. And then the Georgia game. If you discount the Georgia game, the most points Tennessee's given up all year is 19. They really locked down Alabama's offense. They're really not locked down, Florida, but there was a quarterback situation there. If you remember, Graham Mertz got hurt. Oklahoma can't score. They haven't played a lot of good offenses. But on the flip side, they haven't exactly scored a ton of points either. 17 against Georgia, 24 against Alabama, 17 in regulation against a Florida defense that wasn't playing elite at that point. The 25 against Oklahoma was largely enabled by Oklahoma's terrible offense. I think it's going to be, Tennessee has shown throughout the course of the year who they are is a 23-ish point offense against anybody. Against good defense, bad defense, it's kind of where you're going to get, right? I don't think they're going to change that overnight and play even better against Ohio State. I actually think that they could play a bit worse. 17 against Georgia, 14 against Arkansas, and I think Ohio State's got a better defense than Georgia. The question really does come down to, and I think the difference for Tennessee has been, if we get into the 30s plus, it's because we hit some of those shots. Otherwise, our offense kind of collapses. But I think they run the ball well enough in a lot of these games that the other team doesn't get the chance to score. So, Tennessee might score 23 points in a game and win because the other team didn't get the ball very much. Because Tennessee, even though they didn't get points, Sampson's getting their yards, getting first downs. Ohio State shuts down the run. I think it's a low-scoring game. I think it's an ugly game. And I think Ohio State, what we're going to see in these playoffs, I think, is that Michigan game was a total aberration, and that Ohio State is a better team than Michigan that just didn't play good that day. Give me Ohio State 20, Tennessee 13. What you got?
Somewhat similar. I'm going to go 24-14 Ohio State. And as I said, I was vaguely aware of all the point spreads around a touchdown this week. The point spread 7.5. Ohio State over under 47.5. Again, we don't bet. We could go in a long discussion. I got into this because I won from one of the major sports sites. I won their national pick'em, and I think I did it 57% against the spread. I had to pick every game every week. hard to beat Vegas. But there are times where I would want to pick a given line. In the over-under at 47.5, which is low, I would hit. This is one that if I were to pick something, I'd say hit the under. There's a lot of reason to think these teams aren't going to score much. Daniel, I agree with you. I mean, I think the most likely outcome here is that Tennessee's offense flails. I could see them getting shut out, frankly, in this game. That is a very, very distinct possibility. They need explosives. And whether or not they can get those is an open question. And they probably need turnover help, which, again, the Michigan game got stopped on, you say turnovers, right? You know, if Ohio State is getting stopped in the red zone and missing field goals, which has been a problem for them and a frustration for Ohio State fans, Tennessee's going to have a chance to win this as a low-scoring game. And the scary thing for Ohio State is that I do think this will be a very low-scoring game. As we say a lot, if scores are below 25, you're hoping that you don't bust coverage twice because that will lose you the ball game. You throw one or two pick sixes, that will lose you the ball game. Why is Alabama out of the playoff, Daniel? It's because they basically threw two pick sixes against Oklahoma, and it got them blown out. In a game that their defense gave up 10 points effectively, it got them blown out. And that is a problem for what their offense is. But when you have low-scoring games, you cannot afford those plays. And if you don't have an offense that's capable of putting up points consistently, you cannot afford those plays. Both these teams, I think, are in that position. So to me, the 7.5 point, I actually think it's unlikely, like you said, 20-13. I almost think it's unlikely for this game to be that close to the point spread. I think it is either going to be a significant win or a very, very tight win or upset. I think the significant win is more likely, which is why I picked it 24-14. But I could not, there's no way on earth that I can predict whether or not they hit on a couple plays. And frankly, if I'm an Ohio State fan, I should be very concerned because that is the kind of team you're facing, and that is the situation you're in against a very good defense. And again, this comes around to the fact that this is why, we had a whole video ticked off about the playoff rankings. We had so many comments from people that very clearly did not watch the video. And Daniel, I don't know how many people in the reply said, yeah, I don't have time to watch it, but I just wanted to tell you why I was mad that you had Alabama in the playoff. When it was not even the point of the video. The point of the video was very much everything else about the playoff. I was much more angry about Ohio State getting this particular seed. I think the format of the playoffs is broken. Having to go through them and then Oregon again, I think is terrible for how good for Ohio State is. Again, they should be the ones playing SMU right now, in my opinion, not Penn State. But it is what it is. This is a game that Ohio State wins most of the time. But this is also a game where if they are off and Tennessee is on, they not just can, but I think they will lose. So it is a scary game, and to me, by far, unsurprisingly, 8-9, but one of the best games of the series. And I will say, Daniel, is my parting thought on this, and I'll let you respond for once to end the video out. I think if Tennessee had had a different seed, they would have a very good shot of making the second or third round. If they had, let's say, Penn State seed, there's a good chance that Tennessee is making it to the third round of the playoffs. And so as much as Ohio State kind of got screwed, I think the fact that Penn State did not fall farther, the fact that Texas did not fall farther, with themselves having now 2 losses, one loss to a team that also beat Tennessee, but Tennessee having actually beaten, somebody of note in Alabama, they kind of got screwed by the whole system and having to play Ohio State. So it's kind of a shame that it's in the first round, but it makes the first round interesting. But do you agree with that? I mean, do you think Tennessee is a team that if they were not playing one of the very best teams in the playoff, would have a really good shot for going further?
Yeah, I think if you give Tennessee either SMU or Penn State, like you put them in that slot, I think they walk to the Final Four. It's all about matchups, right? And that's one of the things that is a little frustrating about the expanded playoffs is it's going to be this grand indictment one way or the other on certain teams or certain conferences. But at the end of the day, you give any decent team several weeks to prepare and then put them in a matchup that favors them in terms of strengths versus weaknesses, they can win the game. That doesn't mean that they were that good. Like if Tennessee wins this game, I don't think that's an indictment on the Big Ten. It's just matchups. That's all it is at this point. And look, you got to prove it. You got to win it on the field, but I think it's matchups.
And I want to interject because you made a point that people probably won't get. I mean, you made the point about walking. Tennessee may be the best run defense. Probably, in my opinion, is the best run defense if it's not Ohio State in the country. In actuality, having watched them play. if they were to get Boise State, with what Boise State's defense is and the way Boise State operates with purely running the ball, that is a nightmare matchup for Boise State, and I think
they'd kill Boise. They'd kill Boise.
So you're right. I mean, it's about matchups. It makes for an interesting game. I just frankly hate that it's in the first round.
I am disappointed that we made it this long without talking about the fact that it is a home game for Ohio State, and that also plays into this a good bit. We are so numbers focused and model focused that we think a lot in terms of neutral field. But I do think that matters in this game. And I also think it matters that finally Ohio State gets to play a big game at night at home. I'm not going to go into the whole big noon kickoff thing. I've had tremendous rants about that. This is important for Ohio State fans. I think it's wonderful. I hope the environment is not like a normal playoff game. I hope it is like a regular season game, a big, August or September out of conference marquee matchup. I hope it's like that. We'll see. All right, y'all. Let us know in the comments what you think about this game and who is going to win. Let us know if you think Tennessee can win this game without hitting the deep shot. Let us know what you think, and we'll get in there and mix it up with you. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.